Hello there, and welcome back to another video. Ironically, the first video on my channel in 2023. In this video, I will have the recording of my talk, Mother and Baby Homes, a tour through time. Hope you enjoy. So, welcome everyone to my presentation, Mother and Baby Homes, a tour through time. This presentation will be looking at the operation of Mother and Baby Homes. How did they come to be? How did they start to exist in Ireland? And this will mainly be taking a look at more recent times, but I just want to also lay the foundations of, how we got to this stage. So for some of you who might necessarily know about me, I do want to kind of give a quick introduction to myself. So, can't be too rude. So my name is Daniel Loftus. I'm a genealogist and co-founder of the Hidden Branch, which is a place for young genealogists to connect and collaborate with each other. We are a bit quiet at the moment, but we do have some things planned. So there is that. And I'm also the creator of Project Infant, which is a website dedicated to recording all the names of mothers and babies who died in these institutions. But obviously, you've heard the phrase mother and baby home being thrown around either by me or by someone else, or on Twitter or wherever you may have seen it. But what actually is a mother and baby home? So it was a place for unmarried women to give birth to their children. As back then it was the idea that you couldn't have had a child outside of marriage, or it was sinful. And this is the place that you'd be sent to. And these were typically religiously run by either religious orders or the Catholic Church, but not all of them were Catholic, run by the Catholic Church. You did have some Protestant-run institutions as well. So obviously in recent times, they have kind of gained quite a bad reputation, and rightly so, as obviously they are notorious for having, a high mortality rate. They're known for having lack of burial records and records in general, just relating to the homes, and be it how they operated or just kind of trying to find where the babies who died are buried, which is kind of a point of contention that we're facing at this time. But primarily, it was a place of abuse where it could be, beating or, neglect. I found that a couple of times, well, more than a couple of times, quite a bit in institutions in the death records for young infants, but also it was later found out by, survivors who were going back tracing their roots and trying to trace who they are, that it was also a place where vaccine trials were conducted. And it's only kind of in recent times, within the last 10 years or so, that all of this is, coming to light. So now that we know what they are and kind of the background of why they are so kind of notorious, how did they start to be a part of Irish society? So originally they were, if you look at most buildings, you'll find that most of them were probably a workhouse. And a workhouse is a place for kind of the poor and destitute. It's like a last resort for many. I've had people in my own family who, I had a great-great-grandfather of mine who was born in the local workhouse in Dungarvan. So it had people from all walks of life showing up there. So the first workhouse was opened in 1840 in Cork, and there were 163 throughout Ireland, but they were actually closed. Most of them, I think, if not nearly all of them, were closed in the 1920s. There may have been a few exceptions. But why that happened is because in 1921, on December 6th, you had the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which was dividing the island of Ireland into Northern Ireland and what the South, which then became the Irish Free State. So it wasn't known as Ireland at that point. So, and that's a photo of the delegates signing the treaty on that day. So, as a result of this led to the collapse of the Board of Guardians, which was how relief was typically administered to the destitute or those who were in these institutions. Now, obviously, you know, you had unmarried mothers, you had the poor, you had the elderly, it could be anyone that is in there. So, you know, due to the lack of relief for unmarried mothers, there was a study that was conducted, I believe, that had said, you know, they do better, or the unmarried women giving birth to children would do better in kind of a separate institution. That link is not in the handout, as I forgot to include that. But that led to the demand for homes to accommodate these mothers and their children increased. Now, kind of the term I use and talk about a lot is mother and baby homes, but there were a number of kind of institutions for these children that went by different names. These are just 3 of them, but I've linked something in the handout that will take a look at more of them, in the sense that it'll give you the names of the different types of kind of homes that ran. So these are the kind of the 3 that you'd hear a bit. So you had mother and baby homes, which is the likes of Bessborough, Sean Ross Abbey, and the Bon Secours home in Tuam, or Glenamaddy, if you're talking about its predecessor. You have county homes, which were institutions that catered for unmarried mothers and their children. But as I have there, it also included the general public and the elderly. One example of this is the county home in Clonakilty, in Cork, County Cork, which is now the Mount Carmel Hospital. And this is what I found typically with county homes, they turned into hospitals afterwards. Then you had Magdalen homes, and do not confuse these with Magdalen laundries, because these were different. So these were institutions run by more charity type organizations, but some were run by the Catholic Church as well. And I'll talk about kind of Magdalen homes later on, but it's interesting depending on kind of what type of institution you're looking at, the kind of records that are available. Now, obviously, when you're looking at these institutions, you realize that it was typically all the blame, or, you know, the focus was put on the unmarried mothers. And in some cases, or in most cases, the father mightn't necessarily have been in the picture. And actually for Kilrush in 1926, there was one case in the Limerick Leader where they said that the Clare County Board of Health was actually trying to make the putative fathers of these children responsible for their upkeep. However, it didn't seem, from what I could find in newspapers, to actually come into effect. Kilrush was established in 1922 and closed 10 years later. It's actually one of the more shorter homes that had, it was actually one of the homes that had the shorter tenures. But typically, I believe, kind of in 1932, kind of when Kilrush, they were either moved to, I think, Tuam, Sean Ross, or Bessborough, as I think they were probably the closest institutions. And typically at the time, I'm sure many had thought that these homes were an idyllic place for the children to grow up in and for the mothers to give birth in. However, when I was researching Sean Ross Abbey early on in the stages of Project Infant, I was looking at the newspapers and I came across this one. So this was from the Nina Guardian in February 1937. This photo is on the Twitter account for Project Infant. I just copy and pasted it, but the image itself comes from the Irish Newspaper Archive, which I found to be incredibly useful in my research here. So I just highlighted a few quotes. So on the left, you had the perspective of the local priest in Roscrea, Father Tui, who had kind of said that, the mother and child is specially cared for in this institution. And it's ideal, as when their families turn them away or their families disown them, it's the perfect place for these children and their mothers to go. And, it's also being described as such an ideal and necessary institution. These homes were needed. However, this is from the same issue, by the way. So right next to this article from a priest, you had this one where they had a diphtheria outbreak. And, it almost, seemed like havoc just to me reading the piece. Because obviously there was an outbreak of diphtheria and, 21 cases in the fever hospital, 15 were from the mother and baby home. So near enough, most of them were from this mother and baby home. And obviously, they were in, it's obviously due to water problems. And one thing that I'm trying to get this presentation as objectively as possible, and it's not just the presentation, it's just trying to conduct my research as objectively as possible in terms of looking at the language used and, the situation of Ireland at the time. But sometimes for me, I find that, well, for me anyway, the kind of more poignant parts of all of this is the phrasing that they use to describe these unmarried mothers. And they range from anything such as a first offender to a second offender to an old offender, repeat offender, and even an inmate. I think I even read in one article that they were once described as a prisoner. So it was things like this that kind of really made me think, oh my goodness, this is how the women were treated or, referred to. They weren't called women. They were just called offenders or an inmate, as if, they were a prisoner and it did some wrong. But of course, at the time, that's what they were believed to have done. And I know this is a bit of a jump, but as I said, this is going to be looking at the more recent events and kind of the unearthing of the whole scandal of mother and baby homes, because of course it was treated as everything was okay, there was nothing wrong, why should we be looking at this now? And it wasn't until 2011 that a historian by the name of Catherine Corliss would go looking into the Tuam mother and baby home, where she would pass on her daily walk to school. Her memoir, Belonging, gives a more kind of detailed look at kind of how she got into this and the events of, her research and getting it out to the world. So kind of a bit of this info is from that book. But part of a local history class, she was writing a piece for a local history journal. And then the topic that she did it on first, the editors liked. So they invited her to do another piece. And that's when she decided to look into the Tuam mother and baby home. She didn't know much about it. And even just doing a quick Google, she couldn't even find much. So she was having to do very detailed research into this home and still couldn't find much out of it. And, when she contacted the GRO in Galway and went chatting to them, trying to find out more about the home, she asked to try and find the death certs of those that, had died in the home. And the clerk at the office had said, okay, I'll go and look. And, eventually came back to her and said, there are 798 death certs for children in the home in Tuam. And Tuam operated from 1925 to 1961, as a bit of background there. And obviously this stunned her. And over time, over the course of 2 years, Corliss would order the death certificates of each one. And and made notes of sort of the cause of the death and every bit of info on it. She then went looking for, where are these children buried? Because, she was trying to figure out, there were so many deaths. Where could they be buried? Were they buried in the local graveyard? She met with the local caretaker of the Tuam graveyard and went through the burial registers. And out of the 798, she could only find the burial records of 2 children that died there. So that left 796 children still unaccounted for. And throughout her research, she was looking at a variety of sources, one of which included a map on the Ordnance Survey. When she went looking, she found the kind of area of Tuam as it is, I believe, in either 1970s or more recent times, and cross-referenced it with an older Wasai map and, overlapped them, so held them up together, and saw that there's a part next to a playground in Tuam, and I believe part of the playground encroaches onto it as well, was an old disused septic tank, and it had said, children's burial ground, or it stated there was a burial ground. And then Catherine went trying to, get the word out about this, that we should be looking into this, are they there? And in May of 2014, the story broke. She went to journalist Alison O'Reilly and the Daily Mail on Sunday, and the news went nationwide and international. This is not the headline itself when it came out in 2014. This is kind of a follow-up one done in June, so about a week after. So that link to that article is in the handout if you wish to take a look. And obviously with the backlash that, the government and the kind of church was getting at the time, thinking, oh my God, there are babies buried in the septic tank. This obviously led to action, and rightly so, because in February of 2015, this is the start of the Commission of Investigation into Mother and Baby Homes. I should say of investigation, my apologies, into Mother and Baby Homes was established. This would be the start of a almost 6-year research into 18 institutions. And obviously, while the research was being conducted, it then was revealed that in June of 2015, in an article by the Irish Examiner, that Bessborough and Tuam, 2 institutions of which that were already being investigated by the Commission, had been part of the Magdalene Laundries inquiry in 2012. And there was due to be kind of research conducted into these homes back then, before the research by Catherine Corliss had been publicised, but obviously Corliss's research had kind of sped that ahead, and they had already known of the kind of volume of deaths that had existed in that home and that had happened. So then in 2021, after 6 years, the final report of the Commission of Investigation was published. This was a very vast report, as you would hope, where it gives you a look into the background of each institution that was investigated, and a kind of look at society at the time and statistical analysis of the statistics of the deaths in mother and baby homes. One piece of information that was widely sought was how many were there? And it was found that around 9,000 children had died in that, across the 18 institutions that were investigated by the Commission. I kind of added up all the numbers. I went through all the reports, and I think it came out as 9,270 something. I can't remember the exact number, but it was a little over 9,000. Now, bearing in mind that was only the 18 homes that were investigated. So there were 14 mother and baby homes and 14 county homes. And in a report done by the Clan Project, it was revealed that there were, I believe, to be a little over 180 institutions or establishments that, had these children in, so like at some point in time, for some period of time. These included Magdalen homes, county homes, mother and baby homes, rescue homes, adoption homes. There were a number of them. And I just want to give you a sample of, 4 homes that were investigated as part of the commission. So I did this little thing myself. So this is a map of where the 4 institutions that I have on the right are. And you can see kind of the amount of women and children that went through these institutions. You can see almost 35,000 in St. Patrick's alone. That was in Dublin. That's the blue pin. Almost 12,000, almost 12,500 in Sean Ross Abbey, Tuam and Bessborough, as you can see there, including Glenamaddy. Glenamaddy was the kind of predecessor to the Tuam home, which had opened in 1922, as did Bessborough, St. Patrick's as well, I think, and Sean Ross Abbey didn't open until 1932. So Tuam is obviously the one that kind of garnered the most attention and what had brought all of this to light. Bessborough is the one that I have a connection to, which you'll see, which you'll hear about in a while. But one thing I did want to say was with with these institutions, these are only 4. So there are so many more that are looked at or that need to be looked at. And try not to. Okay, moving on. So obviously this is just a sample of them, but kind of another thing which I saw as kind of like, a good sign for adoptees and survivors of mother and baby homes and these institutions is the Birth Information and Tracing Act. So this is signed into law on June 30th of last year. And kind of this is the about of kind of, what this legislation does on the birthinfo.ie site. That was launched, which you'll hear about later on. So in 2022, a good few things happened. Obviously, this Birth Information Tracing Act, continuing research by academics and obviously fighting to get survivors' rights was raging on. But for me, something happened in July. So on July 13th, I had interviewed genealogist Megan Smoleniak as part of my Genealogy Live interview series, which I actually stopped halfway through, which I probably should finish. But you'll hear why that kind of got derailed. And it's amazing what words can do, because it was these 6 words just sparked it all for me. So I had asked Megan, what does genealogy mean to you? Why is it so important to you? And her response was perfect and said to give a voice to the forgotten. And that I had about 20 minutes left in the interview when I asked that. And my brain was still trying to listen to what Megan was saying while also computing about, oh my God, I really want to do a project. I don't know what I could do it on, but I do want to do something that, has a positive impact on kind of using genealogy to, do research into something. At the time, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Before this happened, though, a cousin of mine had reached out to me on Facebook and had said, he was telling me that he was going to be seeing a band, and they had released, or they had a song that was written about the Tuam Mother and Baby Home, and said, there was a Loftus in the home that died there. Is it any relation to us? Obviously, when everyone has a question about their, genealogy and, our family genealogy, I'm always the one they go to. So as a part of that, I got curious and went looking into, could this Loftus potentially have a relation to me? And then I went looking and I quickly found the death cert for a John Patrick Loftus who died in Tuam in 1937. And it said that this John Loftus was from Killala, which is North Mayo, and my Loftuses tended to stick around the same area of Mayo, which is a place called Bahola. So if you do any Loftuses in that area, please let me know. I'd love to connect. I'm kidding, obviously. I'm hitting a dead end there. Anyway, so at the time, that was still in the back of my head. And obviously, I was still keeping that as a factor if I could maybe incorporate that into a potential project, as I was considering it when Megan told me that. And then it made the whole mother and baby home side of things, which kept sticking in my head, made me think of my own family member who had survived Vesper. So I always call her Beth. She's happy for me to tell her story, which isn't much, but she just requests to, not be she just requests to be anonymized. So Beth is one of my relations who was born in Bessborough Mother and Baby Home in late 1970 and was adopted in early 1971, I believe, around January. So she was only in there for, I believe, about I think 2 months, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I try to remember all the facts, but I've got so much of this presentation I forget some bits. And it kind of made me think with Beth, kind of without her surviving, I would not actually exist. So it really kind of hit home for me, realizing that, if Beth didn't survive, I wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be on this planet. I wouldn't have even been alive. So that was quite poignant to me when I realized that. And kind of, it wasn't until kind of a couple of days after I went looking into, I just did a deep dive into Google thinking, oh, there's surely got to be, something on Google where, there's a database of all who died, or, there's got to be the names of those who died in these homes publicly accessible. I could only find the names for those who died in Bessborough Mother and Baby Home and Tuam Mother and Baby Home. I was told there was one for Sean Ross available somewhere online publicly, but I couldn't find it. So with all those factors playing into one, the interview with Megan, the thing for my cousin and Beth, that caused me to launch Project Infant. And, my mission is to, record the names and make it into a database of every mother and baby who died in these, pardon my French, but hellhole of an institution. And I know the mission statement says the site dedicated to all victims of mother and baby homes in Ireland. You'll see why that has an asterisk in a little while. But some people have kind of, come up to me and said, oh, I'd love to donate. Oh, I how do you do it? All that sort of thing. First of all, I don't take donations. So it's all out of my own pocket. And, I have no problem with that because it's something that's needed, in their memory. So as far as kind of how the process is and, how I do it, I look at the death registers. So it's always hard starting out first because I always start from zero, at the age of 0 on Irish genealogy. I do a pretty broad search. I obviously don't know any of the names of those who died in there. So I do an empty name field. I tick the death box. This is in the advanced search of Irish genealogy, by the way. I go through, I just do 1 year at a time because, depending on where you're looking, it can be quite busy. So I just do 1 year at a time and I go click, 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 click through every result and anything tying to I tune my mind, but kind of anything that has a relation to a form of an institution, be it the hospital, the fever hospital, the home itself, or some other place that's connected to it. I make a note of it and I put all of that info into a spreadsheet. Their name, their age, in terms of years, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, and incredibly seconds. I've only had one where they were listed as being born or being alive for 5 seconds. But they were alive just long enough to be considered a living child. And thankfully they got a death cert, which was recorded as well. But that was in Kilrush, and that one's always stuck with me for some reason. It's amazing kind of what things stick with you through all this research. And then after all that is done, I then create an individual page for each infant that died. So currently I'm at 2,510 kind of individual pages. So I'm amazed how the site hasn't crashed yet, but it's speedy and I don't think it's going to crash anytime soon, and let's hope it doesn't. And obviously at the start, I wasn't really sure. I was just getting out, and the Mother and Baby Home activist campaigner, I reluctantly have become one. I say reluctantly, it was not by choice, but I was furious at a lot of things. So that caused me to kind of be a little bit of an activist. So obviously I wasn't really sure, how do I get the word out about this? Because obviously at the time I was only kind of in genealogy circles, and that will only ever go so far. I needed this to reach the public. So I emailed a couple of journalists who had done kind of previous coverage on mother and baby homes and previous topics relating to them. And on September 11th, 2022, and it was one of my proudest moments, and it's still my header on every social media to this day. I can never get rid of it. It was a piece written about Project Infant by Orla Ryan. And that quote, "These were babies, not numbers," came from at that time when, I think a couple of days before I was interviewed for the piece, I was looking at these kind of, the individual reports for each of these homes. And what I saw was, or I kept seeing was, there were 9,000 babies. There were 1,090. There were 923. There were 267. That's Kilrush, by the way, which hasn't actually been publicized, I don't think, anywhere else. There've been about 5 different numbers. It's 267 from what I can find. But, I just kept seeing numbers and no names. And that annoyed me, which is another reason why I kind of started it, because to me, these, as it says, these were more than babies. And these were more than numbers. These were babies. These were women. They were living people who had an identity. They had a family. They were like you and me. They weren't aliens from Mars, as much as some people in society at the time would rather think. It's, these were living people who deserve memory and deserve to be remembered, regardless of where they came from, what the background was. They needed to be remembered. And that's when this piece came out, because I just wanted that quote, by the way, just actually came out of nowhere. That just rolled off the tongue and I couldn't stop myself saying it. But anyway, moving on October 3rd, the day before my birthday, the birthinfo.ie site was launched. And as obviously you saw earlier, this is to be a portal between TUSLA and I believe the AAI, the Adoption Authority of Ireland, to work on individual cases to try and give, survivors of mother and baby homes their birth info, basic information about themselves. And I know took until 2022 to do that, or to even think about doing that. And this fight had been going on for decades, I might add, as well. But while this seemed like an absolute lifeline, it was quickly discovered that it was not going to work out the way it had planned. on the site, it was promised that the time it would take to, process these applications would take 30 days. Nope. Then we were told it was going to take 90 days. Nope. And as part of a RT article that came out of, I believe, a couple of weeks ago, the earliest I believe most people can expect to get their records is July 2023. And I know that's a number of months to go, but Beth is also still waiting for her record. She applied on January 11th and hasn't even gotten sorry, we cannot deliver your records to you in the desired time frame. And then, obviously, there was a redress scheme. And this is to provide a payment to those who had spent time in an institution. However, there was one small catch. Those who spent less than 6 months in an institution were not, covered by the Commission of Investigations report, are not eligible for a payment. So, to give you an idea of how many that's excluding about 40% of survivors, equaling about 24,000 people who survived these institutions, and they don't get anything. And I was following this very closely, and I was actually I was kind of adding the slides kind of as this was happening. So February 1st, 2023, the Amendment 2 to include people, that should say people, not person, who spent less than a period of 6 months in a mother and baby institution that had been covered by the Commission of Investigation to be made eligible for payment had been denied. 65 to 71. And this had sparked outrage all over Twitter, because I can remember Twitter being an absolute hellfire that night. But it was a case that there were 71 TDs who did not feel that it was appropriate to give these survivors of these institutions redress in any shape or form in terms of any monetary redress. And at that time, I was still doing research into mother and baby homes and that sort of thing. And childrenshomes.org.uk has been a lifeline for me. That is a website by Peter Higginbotham, who also manages Workhouses, and I can't remember the other one. I think he has 3, but you have Workhouses and you have childrenshomes.org.uk, which, has been incredibly useful for me. And, I then realized I had to face the music very quickly, as, that was one of the times when I just realized. Now, I'd known about this early on, but it kind of only hit me then of the amount of institutions that existed. Your community homes, certified schools, industrial schools, Magdalene homes, you had all kinds. And, it just, it just made me think, there is so much more that needs to be covered than modern baby homes. There needs to be something based on all of these homes. And I know I had the asterisk over kind of, for the mission statement of Project Infant. In time, it will include every kind of institution for children that operated in Ireland. It's a big task, I know. I've had people asking me, are you going to do England? That's another thing down the line. But by goodness, I'm going to need a lot of help. And that was February 9th. So then February 22nd came around. And this was a turning point, because at the time you had, I remember there was I believe it was Ireland AM on Virgin Media TV, which is the broadcast station over here in Ireland. And I remember there was a segment on the Mother and Baby Homes Redress Scheme from campaigner Noel Brown and Dr. Maeve O'Rourke, who were, trying to get the word out about this redress scheme. And Maeve O'Rourke, who was part of the Clan Project, had in part launched a email campaign to email the TDs and all TDs and senators and show them how many people cared and wanted the redress scheme to be amended and changed, and have those who spent less than 6 months in a mother and baby institution included. I was one of the many who did it. And even to this day, I'm still getting emails basically with the same blanket response saying, thank you for contacting me. You know, I understand your concern, and keep going on. You know, it's a very long email. I couldn't possibly read it all, but kind of, you know, it basically said the same thing. And, you know, there were plenty of TDs or senators that did not respond to, imagine the plethora of emails they were getting. But on this day, the Parent Scheme Bill, as far as it is, passed in the Dáil, 62 to 73. Sorry, excuse me, 73 to 62. So this meant that, you know, 73 TDs were happy with the scheme as it is. So it was passed in the Dáil, still excluding 24,000 survivors of mother and baby homes. Then March 8th came around, and as part of International Women's Day, I shared the very first progress update on how many were added to the site. And I won't explain it here, as you can see, you know, how many have been added. But the 6 homes that are on there are Bessborough House, Cork, Kilrush Nursery, Clare, Seanras Abbey, Rosscraig, County Tipperary, Temple Hill, Blackrock, County Dublin. Some people will probably say, not that. Then you have Manor House in Castle Pollard, and the other one. Got the other one. Damn it. I should know this by now. I've looked at it, but it's not so long. I should know this by now. It'll come to me in a second. I know it. So, and that's kind of where we're at, I think, at the moment. I do want to first share with you, before I do wrap this up, with some resources to look at. So these are some books. So I'd recommend reading Republic of Shame by Kaylin Hogan. This takes a look at Temple Hill and kind of like really gets kind of close with, so like her quest to kind of find out more information. You know, she talks to nuns in religious orders, and kind of, you know, you see survivors and relatives of survivors mentioned in it, and so like, you know, their stories in there too. You have My Name is Bridget, done by Alison O'Reilly. This is the story of Bridget Dolan, a mother who went through the mother and baby home in Tuam. Belonging by Catherine Corliss and Naomi Linehan. That's the memoir where I got a bit of the background info about Catherine at the start, so I do recommend reading that, as I've found it was quite nice to kind of read into her search and kind of, you know, just reading how she was feeling throughout the whole process. I just found it very interesting. And on the left is the Redacted Lives podcast, which was done by Orla Ryan, a journalist for the journal.ie, who had also done the piece on me. And it takes a look and at interviewing a couple of survivors. So you've had Terry Harrison, Maria Arbuckle, Mary Harney? I've forgotten. It lists a good few survivors who went through it, and just talking about, you know, their experiences in the home that they were in. You know, you'd Bessborough, I believe it's St. Patrick's as well. You'd a range of them, but it's definitely worth a listen. It's only 6 episodes, but well worth a listen. And on that note, I want to say thank you to the people who are watching currently, and also who will be watching the recording later. Thank you to you too. So if you want to keep in touch with me, and/or Project Infant, you can contact me on the following channels. And if you do want to as well, I did say I'm going to need a lot of help to make this project a reality. So if you are watching this and you do want to help, I have a volunteer scheme where I work with people to research the names of those who died in the homes or transcribe the entries of the death/birth entries of the infants and mothers who died in the home or died in the homes. So if you are interested in helping me out with that, pop me an email on the Project Infant email address listed there. And as for the sources, I always try to leave this at the end. See the handout. And if you're watching this on YouTube, see the description down below or type in this URL into your browser. And that's all. So thank you everyone for watching.